There are people who move through life like quiet bridges. They exist to be crossed, leaned on, needed. They make space for everyone else, even when they have none left inside themselves. The world praises their softness, their patience, their generosity, but rarely asks how heavy it becomes to never be held in return. Always being the strong one is a lonely form of love. Always being the understanding one is a quiet abandonment. Always being needed can become its own kind of invisibility. Somewhere along the way, giving stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a role that cannot be undone. Because when you are the one who carries everything quietly, no one hears the sound of you breaking. And the most painful part is not the exhaustion. It is the moment you realize the world has grown used to your emptiness and confused by your absence. His is the unseen cost of always putting others first. Not in what you give, but in what slowly disappears from you. Chapter 1: The Invisible Role. Some people move through life as if carrying an invisible weight. Not the weight of objects, but of expectation. They are the quiet pillars in rooms full of voices. The ones who listen when no one else can. Who offer help before it is asked. In the beginning, it feels natural. There is a small, subtle joy in being needed. The world responds with gratitude, smiles, and reliance. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, giving becomes a definition of self. They are no longer just themselves. They are the helper, the peacemaker, the one who sacrifices. Their identity entwines with usefulness. It is a silent contract, to be indispensable yet unseen. Every favor granted, every time someone else is comforted, their own presence fades into the background. Even small acts of kindness, repeated endlessly, begin to feel like chains. And yet, stopping feels impossible. Because to stop would mean stepping out of the role entirely. And to step out is to risk being unknown. To risk the quiet panic of self-worth unanchored by the approval of others. This is the paradox of the invisible role. To be loved for what one does, but never fully for who one is. The more they give, the more their own edges blur. And the world, accustomed to their constancy, scarcely notices the subtle erosion of their soul. Chapter 2: Where it began. The pattern often starts long before adulthood, in the quiet spaces of childhood. A small hand reaching for attention, and a parent too busy, too distant, or too exhausted to notice. A child learns, slowly and silently, that love is conditional. That being seen means performing. That being safe means serving. In these early lessons, selflessness is not a choice. It is survival. When a child comforts a sibling to quiet a storm at home, or anticipates the moods of a parent to avoid disappointment, they are learning the language of emotional currency. It feels familiar, even comforting, to earn affection through care. The child discovers that usefulness is measurable. Kindness becomes a shield, and giving becomes a habit sewn into the very fabric of their being. And as years pass, the line between voluntary love and instinctive sacrifice blurs. The child grows, carrying the quiet imprint of a lesson learned too early. To be wanted, one must give endlessly. Even when the world changes, even when adult freedom arrives, the echoes of those early patterns linger. The instinct to put others first remains, as natural as breathing, and as invisible as the air around them. This is the origin of chronic self-giving, an imprint of survival, a gentle yet persistent echo of a love once measured by what could be offered, rather than what could simply exist. Chapter 3: The Psychology of Overgiving. The mind has its own way of entangling generosity with identity. Overgiving is not merely habit, it is a pattern reinforced by deep emotional circuits. Empathy, once a gift, can become a constant pulse, an alert system sensing the needs of others before they are spoken. Psychologists describe it as an empathy loop. The more one comforts, the more one's sense of self relies on being needed. Boundaries blur. Personal desires shrink. Even subtle acts of self-neglect are rationalized. I am helping. I am loving. This is who I am. Attachment styles reveal another layer. Those conditioned to seek approval may find their value only in service. Avoidant or anxious tendencies can fuel the compulsion to give. The mind fears conflict, abandonment, or rejection, so it sacrifices freely in the quiet hope of connection. Neurologically, acts of giving can release a gentle wave of dopamine, a soft reward that convinces the brain this sacrifice is a source of pleasure. But repeated endlessly, the reward fades, replaced by exhaustion, anxiety, and subtle resentment. Overgiving is thus both emotional and biochemical, a loop difficult to recognize from within. It is a silent addiction, invisible to the world, where generosity begins to mask an absence of self-regard. The irony is sharp. In the act of giving everything to others, the giver loses the capacity to care for themselves. And the world, accustomed to the supply, rarely notices the depletion. Chapter 4. The Quiet Resentment. Beneath the surface of constant giving, a subtle storm often brews. It is quiet, almost imperceptible at first, like a shadow stretching across a familiar room. The generous heart begins to notice small cracks. A favor unacknowledged, a need unmet, a kindness taken for granted. Resentment does not roar, it whispers. It grows in the silence between what is given and what is returned. A soft anger emerges, not toward others, but toward the self. For feeling this anger at all, there is guilt in needing, in wanting, in wishing someone else would shoulder the weight for once. And so, resentment becomes layered with shame, buried beneath a practiced smile, a helping hand, a patient nod. The internal conflict is relentless. To stop giving feels selfish. To keep giving feels necessary. To speak up feels risky. To stay silent feels safe. It is a paradox of the selfless life. The more indispensable one becomes, the more invisible their true needs remain. Emotional exhaustion blends with guilt, and what was once a quiet pride in generosity becomes a hollow ache. A whispering reminder that selflessness has a cost, that no one else can carry for them. The quiet resentment is not dramatic, but it is corrosive, slowly reshaping the soul in ways that are hard to see until the breaking point arrives. Chapter 5. The moment something breaks. The breaking point is rarely sudden. It is not a loud collapse, but a quiet, hollow realization. The giver, so long the anchor, the constant, suddenly feels the emptiness beneath their feet. The weight they have carried for years, often unnoticed by others, presses down with a gravity they can no longer deny. It may be a single moment, a forgotten favor, an ungrateful remark, a request they cannot fulfill. Or it may be the culmination of countless tiny omissions, the invisible ledger of self-sacrifice finally balancing against nothing in return. The emotional silence that follows is profound. Shock, sadness, anger, shame. They are left staring at themselves, stripped of the mask of indispensability, and wondering if anyone would notice if they simply stopped. It is a strange kind of loneliness, one that exists even in crowded rooms. Because for years, they have been seen not as a whole person, but as a reservoir, an emotional resource. And now the reservoir is dry. And yet, in the hollow ache of this breaking, there is clarity. The very collapse that feels like loss becomes the first recognition. That selflessness without boundaries is unsustainable. That giving without care for oneself is not love, it is depletion. In that moment, the giver meets themselves, and for the first time wonders, who am I, beyond what I provide? Chapter 6. Learning a New Kind of Love. After the breaking point, there is a stillness. A quiet space where the constant noise of giving no longer dominates. It is unfamiliar and uncomfortable, yet necessary. For the first time, the giver encounters themselves as separate from their service. This chapter of life is not about grand transformations, but subtle awakenings, noticing one's own fatigue, honoring personal limits, and feeling the soft weight of wants and needs that had long been ignored. It is learning to exist without performing, to receive without guilt, to say no without fear. Psychologically, it is a gentle unlearning. Boundaries are no longer rules to enforce. but signals to protect the fragile core of self. Self-compassion is not a lesson, but a daily, quiet practice. Sitting with discomfort, recognizing worth outside of usefulness, and permitting oneself to simply be. It is slow work, and sometimes the old instincts rise like tides, pulling them toward familiar patterns of overgiving. But each small act of resistance, each embrace of their own needs, is a quiet reclaiming of soul space. In this new rhythm, giving can exist without erosion. Love can be shared without vanishing. And slowly, they learn that the most radical act of care is sometimes allowing oneself to be cared for. Chapter 7: Becoming Whole Again. Wholeness does not arrive as a sudden revelation. It is quieter than that, more like a tide returning after a long absence. The giver, once invisible in their endless service, begins to feel the subtle presence of themselves again. A breath of space, a flicker of curiosity, a soft permission to exist without agenda. In this chapter, the reclaiming of self is gentle. It is not hardened or defensive. It is the careful weaving together of edges that were worn down by years of giving. The restoration of a self that had long been measured by others' needs rather than its own. There is a new understanding that love is not a ledger, and generosity is not a currency to buy worth. They learn that presence, attention, and care can coexist with boundaries, and that saying no can be an act of preservation, not rejection. Reflection becomes a practice. Moments of quiet, moments of stillness, moments of feeling whole without apology. The world may still rely on them, still take their kindness for granted. But they are no longer lost in the act of giving. In the delicate balance between self and others, the giver finally recognizes their own value as intrinsic. And in that recognition there is a soft, enduring freedom. To love without vanishing, to be needed without dissolving. To exist fully, simply, and beautifully as oneself.